On today's episode of Locked On NHL, the Battle of Alberta. Who will miss the playoffs? Plus, the Central Division is getting heated up with the Predators and the St. Louis Blues catching heat. And we will wrap up today's episode with a little bit of all-star talk. All that much more in today's episode of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Western Conference Tuesdays. I am Brett Holden from Locked On Oilers, and joining me is Dane Lewis from Locked On Stars. Dane, how have you been this week?
I'm doing great, Brett. We're about halfway through the season. The Stars actually at the halfway point. They'll start the second half of their year tonight on Long Island, and this has been a really fun year for hockey. I mean, a lot of great players, a lot of great storylines to follow, and a few surprising teams as well. So I can't complain, and always glad to get to talk a little bit of the entire Western Conference here on Tuesdays. Fun to talk about the Stars, but I think it's good for me and for everyone else to get up to date on everything that's going on around the league with the rest of the teams. And I mean, just because it's such a fun conference this year and such an interesting conference with some of the teams that are performing well and some teams not so much, which I know we're going to talk about here in just a second.
Yes, the Western Conference has been anything but predictable so far this year. And that's what we're going to start off with today on today's episode of Locked On NHL. As mentioned, we're going to start off with a little bit of Battle of Alberta talk, as the Pacific Division has been just a shakeup. The Golden Knights on top. The Kraken are in a playoff spot. What is going on here? And the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames are on the outside looking in. We will talk about that in just a second. But also on today's episode, the Predators, since the last time we spoke about them, and the St. Louis Blues have both been on a little bit of a run, sneaking into those spots behind the Edmonton Oilers and the Calgary Flames. How did they do it, and what's going on in the Central Division? That will come up a little later on today's episode, and we will wrap up today's episode with a little bit of all-star talk. Who would we put in those three extra spots on the Team Central and Team Pacific at the All-Star Game? All that and much more on today's episode of Locked On NHL. Thank you so much for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. Dane, last night in Tinseltown was quite an interesting one between the Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings, as the Edmonton Oilers got the second half of their season started and not in a way that they expected. A 6-3 loss at the Crypto.com Arena. Let's be real, it's a Staples Center. But a 6-3 loss at the Crypt, as I've seen some people call it. Both goalies played in this one, as Stuart Skinner getting pulled after saving 21 of 24. Jack Campbell comes in, makes a ridiculous save, still happens to be a goal. The Edmonton Oilers can't find much scoring, and the Oilers lose again. The Oilers are currently, as of right now, occupying a wild card spot, same as the Calgary Flames. But we don't think that's going to last long, do we, Dane?
No, it's a weird season. Like we kind of said a minute ago at the start, a lot of teams still in contention for those wild card spots. And Calgary and Edmonton, I almost said Alberta, as if Alberta just has its own team representing it right there. And these were teams at the start of the season, especially, those two that I think a lot of people expected to be in the top three. I think I had Edmonton winning the entire division. And you look at the team on paper, and Connor McDavid, the best player in the league, as he's regarded, is actually being that this season. I mean, he's scoring at will. He's getting points at will. It seems like he's a lock for the Hart Trophy this season, but the rest of the team outside of Leon Draisaitl, it feels like just hasn't been able to follow suit. And of course, you have to factor in some injuries as well. Evander Kane, the goaltending and the defense maybe not up to task for the majority of this season, but Calgary, I think, doesn't, they're no exception from this debate as well. I think people expected them to be competitive after a disappointing into the playoffs last season. They lose a lot of their key guys like Johnny Gaudreau, they lose Matthew Tkachuk, but they bring in, Mackenzie Weegar, Jonathan Huberdeau, Nazem Kadri, and they still have Jacob Markstrom, who was fantastic in the playoffs last season. And here they are with the Edmonton Oilers, both teams sitting in a playoff spot right now, but seems to be that they're barely hanging on by a thread. And teams like Nashville, teams like St. Louis are starting to heat up. And, if things continue this way, who knows what the playoff picture could look like for those teams in Alberta.
Well, right now, 5 Pacific Division teams are making it to the playoffs, but I think I can speak on both of our behalf saying I don't think there's going to be 5 teams from the Pacific making the division or making the playoffs, excuse me. And it's going to be one of those Albertan teams not making the playoffs. Dane, give me the team in Alberta who is not making the playoffs. Make the case for why they're not going to make the playoffs and make the case for the team who is going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's not an easy, task to do that, and I feel like it could fluctuate for me, but as of right now, just from what I've seen from these teams, which isn't a ton, but I mean, these teams are on national TV quite a bit, so I'm able to catch their games and just get to watch them play, get some insight from the people watching them, a lot of guys that have good hockey experience and things of that nature, and I feel like right now, even though Calgary has 1 point up on Edmonton, I feel like they just miss out. Anytime I've watched Calgary this season, there may be one of the more inconsistent teams that still is a good team this season. Like I mentioned, they have those good players, your Huberdeaus, Weegar, Lindholm, and the defense shows up every now and then. Nazem Kadri on the team as well. Like the pieces are there, and I think that they'll be competitive throughout the majority of the season. Similar to Vegas last season, though, I feel like they'll be competitive until the last week, and then I think things maybe just start to unwind for them a little bit. Jacob Markstrom just has not been himself this season. The goaltending in general just hasn't been great for Calgary. Their goal differential only at +3 and Edmonton at +4. So both these teams can score. They just can't necessarily defend very well. They're also not necessarily a good road team. 7-7-6 away from the Saddle Dome. And I just think as they play those games down the stretch, I just don't know if this team is made to compete in those games down the stretch like they were last season when they had one of the best rosters, it seemed, in the league. Whereas you have Edmonton, who actually looking at NHL.com right now has a better road record than a home record. 10-11-2 at home is Edmonton, 11-7-1 when they're on the road. And so I think that that's going to provide some value for them as the season goes on. The good teams that end up making the playoffs are usually teams that can compete well on the road. And it's just also difficult for me to count out Connor McDavid. I know that the Edmonton Oilers, they have their flaws, they have their shortcomings, just like any other team. But when you have a player who's playing as well as he is, it's hard to bet against that. And I think they're one of those teams that they'll make the postseason. I think they might just barely make it in, but you're not going to want to play them. You're not going to want to get matched up against them because then you have to game plan for Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and you have to try to beat them 4 times in a best of 7 series, and that's much easier said than done. And I think that Edmonton could be that team that gets in, maybe gets a wild card spot, or maybe gets the 3rd spot in their division. And people say, yeah, they're here, but they might not make much noise. But I really do think they can. And who knows what kind of moves they'll make at the trade deadline that could help bolster that roster. And the same could be said for Calgary, but I think Edmonton has a little bit more appeal to bring in a big trade target, or at least a nice addition to the roster that could either provide depth or a position of need that could be filled.
Well, and that was kind of where I was going to go as well. The Edmonton Oilers are probably going to make a big move, whether that is a forward up front, whether that's a defenseman like Jacob Chikrin. I've heard Joel Edmondson. Don't want Joel Edmondson, but we're not going to talk about that. I've heard a lot of conversation around who the Edmonton Oilers might be bringing in. And if you get a healthy Evander Kane, just like last year, Ken Holland will sit there and go, well, he's almost like a deadline acquisition right there. So it's kind of predictable in that sense. And yes, I agree that I think the Edmonton Oilers are probably in a better position if they were to make a move that it would better their team. Plus, Calgary also has players like Oliver Shillington, who is injured. Yes, it's Oliver Shillington on the base, but Oliver Shillington is a very solid 2-way defenseman, fantastic in his own and works his absolute butt off. And I think the Calgary Flames are missing a player like him too. So I will pose this final question to you before we move on. By the way, I do think it'll be the Oilers over the Flames in the playoffs because, I mean, if you're the Edmonton Oilers, you're sitting here. Connor McDavid has 77 points. He has 34 goals, 43 assists, his best offensive season of his career. Connor McDavid's. And you're sitting outside of a playoff, or well, you're sitting in a wild card spot. By the way, you also have this guy named Leon Draisaitl. Don't know if you ever heard of him. 22 goals, 40 assists, 62 points. So you have the two top scorers on your team. You're doing all you. They're doing all they can. The defense needs to help out. The defense needs to help out. But I'm going to pose this question to you. It may be a little controversial because honestly, I've been born and bred an Oilers supporter, and I'm here reporting on the Oilers now. But Daryl Sutter is one of the greatest coaches this sport has ever seen. If the Flames miss out on the playoffs, do you think there might be a coaching change in Calgary?
That is a great question, and it's hard for me to say. I want to say no, just because, like you said, he's one of the biggest names in the world of NHL coaching right now. He's been in this game for a long time. He's had some good seasons in Calgary, but hasn't been able to get it done. I think if they're competitive and miss this season, I don't see it happening. If there's some sort of, huge collapse here where the team just falls apart and there's not really injuries to blame for it. It's just the team kind of unwinding. I think there could be that possibility, but I think if the team's competitive and is in a playoff window until the last week or two of the season, I think that they'll maybe let him stick around for a little bit longer and see what they can do to build the roster up in the offseason and maybe give him one more shot. I don't know. I know that the expectations were high for the Flames this season after a disappointing end last year. But I mean, I just feel like it'd be, I don't know, a little too quick to fire the coach, maybe. But maybe, I mean, I'm obviously not in Calgary or a part of that fan base. I don't really know what the pulse is on him right now as a coach. But me personally, I think if this team is competitive and they stay in the hunt for a playoff spot late into the year and they just miss out, I think you maybe hold on to Sutter. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure there's a plethora of opinions on that with the guy like Sutter, who's been around as long as he has.
Yes, absolutely. And the only reason why I ask that is because there's a new kind of changing of the guard when in regards to their forward core. They have Huberdeau, they have Kadri, they have Uyghur coming in. It's a new kind of system now, not system, but a new personnel in Calgary. So I wonder if they want to freshen it up a little bit. But again, I love Daryl Sutter. I think he's a fantastic coach. Probably would think it's the wrong play, but either way, as you mentioned, we're not in the Flames system here, but you know who is? Jess and Nick over at Locked On Flames. So they do have a pulse on it. Make sure you check into Locked On Flames for more on that. Maybe they will talk about a little Daryl Sutter. Don't worry about Locked On Oilers, though. I heard their host has a lot of hair and he's kind of smelly. Either way, let's move on to the Central Division as the Nashville Predators and the St. Louis Blues evidently listen to Locked On NHL Western Conference Tuesdays as we have lit a little bit of a fire under their bum, and they have been rolling as of late. What is going on in the Central Division, and can those two teams take over the two Alberta teams in the wild card race and maybe even slip up into the Central Division as well? We will talk about that in just a second, but first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. I'm talking pro football, college bowl season. As we both know, last night was a little bit of a oh, they scored again. Either way, there's also basketball going on, and I know the World Cup just ended, but Manchester United and Charlton Athletic is playing today. Dane, I know you're keeping a close eye on that one, that's for sure, isn't it? They've got it all at BetOnline either way. Plus, if you love sports podcasts, which if you're listening to this one, you probably do anyways, they got those at BetOnline as well. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Dane, we were talking about it, I believe, last week, if not certainly in weeks past. The Central Division has had some pretty interesting results as of late, pretty interesting teams and pretty interesting places. And now, since the last time we spoke, the Nashville Predators have jumped over the Colorado Avalanche in the Central Division standings. The St. Louis Blues are also tied on points with the reigning Stanley Cup champions, crawling up on that wild card spot. What is going on in the Music City and St. Louis? I don't really know a nickname for St. Louis.
I don't either, and I probably could think of some, but people in St. Louis might not like the nickname, so I won't do that right now. But I'll start with the Nashville Predators, who have not lost since the last time we recorded on Tuesday, January 3rd. They've won games 6-3 against Montreal, 5-3 at Carolina. Not an easy feat to win in Carolina, and UC Saros. Just a ridiculous game. I know it was 60 plus saves. The exact number is escaping me right now, but an unbelievable performance from UC Saros against the hottest team in the league in Carolina. A 3-2 win at Washington. And on Monday, January 9th, just last night, a 3-0 shutout over the Ottawa Senators, playing incredibly good hockey right now. And I mean, this is just a team that I feel like is starting to get hot and maybe starting to find their identity a little bit, being led by the guys you expect to be leading this team. In their last 5 games, Philip Forsberg has 5 goals, and he's 7 points in total. Roman Yossi also finding ways to contribute. I think they're finally just getting things to click in Nashville. I think it's taken a little bit of time, and I think they're taking advantage of some teams like Colorado, who is still ridden with injuries and still trying to put themselves back together, and maybe even teams like Edmonton and Calgary, those teams starting to fall back a little bit and maybe not pick up as many points consistently. And it's a mixture of those two things. It's a right time, right place for Nashville, getting hot at the right time when a lot of people, including myself, have kind of written them off as maybe a team that could miss the postseason, but they start playing well at the right time. Maybe they make the right moves at the trade deadline and they could be a potentially dangerous team. I don't know if they make the top 3 in the Central Division, although they're only 3 points out of it right now, with Minnesota with 47 points, Nashville with 44. It certainly could happen, but it's still a long way to go this season. Nashville only 39 games played, so they do also have the advantage of having games in hand, but I think they're finding their stride offensively. They're finding ways to score goals, and it's just a matter of, can they get UC Saros to be as great as he was against Carolina consistently. I think the defense and the goaltending has kind of been the big question mark for them this season. Seems like they're getting that to some extent here over the past week. Obviously, a shutout against Ottawa is no, small task. It's difficult to shut out a team, but especially as the road team. But not allowing more than 3 goals a game over the past week is pretty impressive. And Saros getting 3 out of the 4 starts in those games. So they're playing well as a team. Everything is clicking cohesively for them, and they've looked really sharp. And now on Wednesday they go to Toronto, and national TV game on TNT. It's time for them to show the hockey world that they're ready to make that jump and be in the playoff conversation here in the second half of the season.
64 saves for UC Saros, 67 shots fired his way. First of all, that is insane. But second of all, that's the goaltending you expected from UC Saros. The fact that Nashville can go from Pekka Rinne to UC Saros so fluidly is disgusting. My question for the Nashville Predators is, I wonder if that win against the Edmonton Oilers was a little bit of a turning point for them. The Oilers have really owned them this year. In fact, Leon Draisaitl has been dubbed the mayor of Nashville. They came back after a massive, massive loss to the Oilers only a week prior, and then they won. And now, since then, they've kept winning. You mentioned, I said this a little bit earlier on in this season. I thought, I don't think Philip Forsberg is the guy that's going to be really running this team or should be running this team. Well, He has been 16 goals, 36 points this year. He has been absolutely tearing it up for Nashville, being a real offensive leader, as you mentioned. But then you start getting players like Yakov Trenin, who are also chipping in as well. Cody Glass being in one of his first full seasons in the NHL. They're getting contributions from players that they needed it from. And that's really been the big thing. My question now is as well, we mentioned St. Louis, by the way, nickname for St. Louis, the Mound City. There we go.
Interesting.
But they are even on points. Yeah, that's a tough name. Either way, they are now even on points with the reigning Stanley Cup champions. Is that more of an indication on the Colorado end, or is that more of an indication on the St. Louis Blues end?
I think it's a little bit of both, as I've mentioned, and we've harped on this the past month or so, and really it's been a story all season that Colorado is injured. They're missing players, including their captain, Gabe Landeskog, who still has yet to play this season. They've had Nathan McKinnon out for some points of the season. A lot of their depth pieces have been in and out of the lineup. It's been Mikko Rantanen and Cale Makar having to kind of carry the load. And then, of course, Alexander Georgiev playing incredibly well in net for them. But I think you also do have to give credit to the St. Louis Blues, which this is another team in the past week. We last recorded on last Tuesday. They've won 3 out of their last 4 games, and all 4 of those games on the road, wins at Toronto, at New Jersey, and at Minnesota. And it's another thing like Nashville, where they're just playing incredibly well against some good opponents. And I think it looks like they're taking advantage of some other teams being down. And it's funny just because last week it was a little bit of a different discussion with St. Louis of they're not necessarily, just a bad team that can't find their identity. They are now down 2 of their best players, including their captain, Ryan O'Reilly, and Vlad Tarasenko, out for extended periods of time. And I know you and I were both kind of like, this isn't necessarily the nail in the coffin for them, but now the mountain that they have to climb becomes incredibly steeper. And they've shown over the past week that they're up for the challenge and they're getting contributions, not just from their big young players like Robert Thomas or Jordan Kyrou. It's been Brandon Saad, who has 5 goals over the last 5 games. Pavel Buchnevich has 6 assists over the last 5 games, 7 points in total. And Jordan Bennington been playing a really nice game as well, getting the win at Toronto in a shootout 6-5, picking up the win in New Jersey. I mean, things are starting to look up for them, despite things on paper looking like everything should be a disaster, which I think speaks to the resiliency of that group and not giving in and not quitting when it would be, I think a lot of people would understand if they started to fall off a little bit with 2 of their big players, not just on the ice, but off the ice as well, not being available. I mean, that would be a pretty big gut punch to a lot of teams. And it's only been a week and there's still a lot of season left. But I think it's a little bit about the Blues showing some resiliency and the Avalanche still not fully a complete team. I keep waiting for them to get fully healthy. And then I feel like they're just going to go scorched earth on the league.
Now, Dane, my favorite advanced stat, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, but I'm not really a big underlying stats guy. Well, I'm an underlying stats guy, but I'm not one of those analytical guys. You can't just pop up a J Fresh thing in front of me and I'll go, oh, yeah, that's a really good hockey player. But one of my favorite advanced stats is goals for and goals against per 60 minutes. So goals for per 60 minutes, goals against per 60 minutes. That way you're able to put everybody on a level playing field. You get the stats of more chances, not necessarily goals or assists, but chances, and you get everybody in there. Robert Bortuzzo has a goals for per 60 minutes since December 23rd of a 5.2 for the St. Louis Blues. Josh Levo with a 4.49. Callie Rosen with a 4.41. Those are your top 3 for the St. Louis Blues. You mentioned that Tarasenko is out. Ryan O'Reilly is out. Some of their top players and leaders are out. But the St. Louis Blues don't care. They're getting production from players who some of you haven't even heard of before. And that's okay. That is good. That is when a winning team wins hockey games. On the flip side, Alexei Torpchenko with a 1.66 goals against per 60 minutes. They're getting production from offensive players, defensive players in all situations. And that is massive here. Dane, one last question before we move on to the All-Star game. Same thing to wrap up the last one. Between these two teams of the Nashville Predators and the St. Louis Blues, heck, we can even throw in Colorado. Who do you think will make the playoffs?
If we're throwing in Colorado, I think it's them. I think as the season goes on, they're going to continue to get healthy. They're going to continue to get players back. I imagine it's going to be enticing for potential trade targets to want to come join the Colorado Avalanche, whether that's a Bo Horvat or a Patrick Kane. I think if we're including Colorado, I think they make it head over shoulders, by quite a bit over Nashville and St. Louis. But if it's just Nashville and St. Louis, and let's say, Colorado either gets a top 3 spot or they fall out of the playoff picture, it's a tough decision. And I think longevity wise, I would go with Nashville just because they're at least as of right now. And if things stay the same, which they could very well change, they're a little bit healthier. I think UC Saros is a little bit more reliable in net than Jordan Bennington. I think that they just have more of the pieces put in place right now. Whereas St. Louis, as good as they've been right now, the question is what they've done over the past week sustainable without their 2 veteran leaders of the team? Can they keep doing it? The answer looks like it could be yes, but I just don't know if they can continue to do so, and the long term health of both teams will play a factor. The moves they make at the deadline will also play a factor. But as of right now, as much as it pains me to say it, as a Stars supporter, Stars podcaster, I would probably roll with the Nashville Predators. Although I don't necessarily care for either team. I think they're both playing really well right now, but I think Nashville has a little bit of the advantage at this moment in time.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I can get behind that as well. I think, yes, Colorado will probably end up being the team if we're being honest here. But if we're going to have a little fun, let's go with a little bit of St. Louis Blues love. I'm sure they'll end up getting Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly back late in the season down the stretch when they need them. Potentially in addition, depending on how they feel later on in the season, if they are a contender, whether or not they're going to be a buyer or seller at the deadline. If they are a buyer, I could see them being adding somebody very, very. I think good is too easy of a term, but very useful for the St. Louis Blues, and I think they make very smart moves when they need to. So I should say on the trade market, maybe so much, not in the free agent market. Either way, it's going to be a very interesting race to the finish in the Central and in the Pacific. But before we get to that interesting race, there is the All-Star game. As the All-Star game rosters have been announced, some interesting snubs. We know that all 32 teams need to be represented. But there need to be a couple more voted in. Who will we vote in for the All-Star game for the Pacific and the Central? We will talk about that in just a second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. Our next partner has a product I use literally every day. I started using AG1 because I wanted to optimize my gut health and my immune system. Plus, I wanted to actually have a supplement that tasted good. I didn't want to keep taking all those pills and just sitting there going, was that really worth it? But that's exactly what I get with AG1. So what is this stuff? With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients, it supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, your recovery, your focus, your aging, all of the things, Dane, all of the things. Plus, it's lifestyle friendly as well, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan free, dairy free, or gluten free. I don't know why I said vegan free. I just meant to say vegan. Either way, they are all good for you, and you can have this. Plus, it contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, all while still tasting great. Plus, it costs less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. Either way, plus it also has over 7,000 5-star reviews and is recommended by professional athletes. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. Just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1 year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NHL network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Alrighty, Dane, it is our favorite part of the year, the All-Star game, right? Did we love the All-Star game? No?
Uh, yeah, it's one of the you know how it is, and everyone listening, we all know how everyone feels about the All Star game. It's a cool honor for players, especially the young guys that it's their first time going. They're getting recognition. Your Jason Robertsons of the world who have now burst on the scene as elite offensive talents. Like it's cool in that regard, but in terms of the product on the ice, it's just okay.
And how do you feel about the format change? How do you feel about the divisions and the 3-on-3? Little gimmicky, or has it been kind of fun?
I think it's fine at the end of the day. I mean, people like the 3-on-3 in NHL games and overtime. I think there's some excitement to it. I mean, I think it's fine. I think at the end of the day, you could throw the word gimmicky out for kind of the entire weekend, even with the events leading up to the game itself. Although at times I think those are more interesting. Fastest skater, and I know last year in Las Vegas they had some really creative ideas of guys shooting pucks like off the fountain or into the fountain of the Bellagio, and so I like that aspect of it. But in terms of the game itself, yeah, it's cool to see three guys on the ice from different teams of from some of the best players in their division. So, I mean, it's exciting in that regard, but I mean, you're not at the edge of your seat wondering who's going to win the Pacific or the Central Division because at the end of the day, both goaltenders aren't going to do too much and put themselves in harm's way to save a puck in a game that means nothing to them in the long term in terms of where their team stands and things like that.
Hey, speak for yourself. 13, 12, 3-on-3 hockey games are always exciting, if you ask me. No, I'm kidding. Plus, I do think that the 3-on-3 kind of was helped when it was first introduced because John Scott was also voted in, which we could see again this year. Wink, wink. But every NHL team has to be represented at the All-Star game. So one player from each team has been announced as an All-Star, I should say. So here is the Central Division All-Stars. We're going to go through the All-Stars on both sides in the Pacific and the Central pit, and then we will pick our 3 extra players to join them in where is this year? I don't Nashville,
Florida.
isn't it?
Florida.
Oh, Florida.
Draft is in Nashville.
Oh, there we go. I'm getting my major events mixed up. But the Central Division goes like this. The Arizona Coyotes, Clayton Keller, Chicago Blackhawks, Seth Jones, Colorado Avalanche. I don't know if you heard of this guy, Cale Makar. Dallas Stars, you mentioned Jason Robertson. Minnesota Wild, Kirill Kaprizov. Nashville Predators, UC Saros. St. Louis Blues, Vladimir Tarasenko. And the Winnipeg Jets, Josh Norrisy. Excuse me, I meant Josh Morrissey. The Pacific Division All-Stars as of right now. Troy Terry is the Anaheim Ducks representative. Nazem Kadri, the Flames representative. Of course, Connor McDavid. Again, don't know if you ever heard of that guy before. The Los Angeles Kings representative is a fun one. Kevin Fiala, who is on an absolute tear as of late, 5 goals in the last 2 games. Erik Karlsson of the San Jose Sharks, who's having an absolute resurgence. Elias Pettersson, I don't think there was a lot of really good picks from Vancouver, but either way, Elias Pettersson is the representative from Vancouver. And the Vegas Golden Knights, Logan Thompson. Dane, where do you want to start here? Do you want to start with the Central Division or the Pacific Division?
If we want to start Pacific, and if you know your guys that you would want to add to this, or maybe Yeah, if you want to throw in guys that you maybe would want to switch as well, I think that could be interesting. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on who you think could join this cast, because I think for the most part that the NHL got this list right on both sides in terms of who should represent. And I know it's difficult with you got to have the balanced out amount of position players and things like that. But overall, I think the NHL did a pretty good job of picking who made it. If you have to get representation from each team.
That's 100% fair. And that's the thing is like, you need representation from every team. You need people tuning in from every team in the NHL. But I think there's certain ones like Elias Pettersson. Is he really having an all-star season? Really? I understand, but even you could even put Andre Kuzmenko in there over Pettersson, if you ask me. But it may sound biased, but I think all of us would agree that it's pretty ridiculous that Leon Draisaitl isn't in there right now. Obviously, he has to compete with Connor McDavid, but Leon Draisaitl would be one of them. And this is where maybe my Oilers bias comes in, but I toss in Ryan Nugent Hopkins as well. He's having one of his best offensive seasons of his career. 19 goals, 29 assists, 48 points so far this year. A lot of people have been calling him a power play specialist too, all the while playing on the first line, third line, second line. That's what a true leader, and I would say an all-star, is able to do: be flexible, play all over the ice. But I don't want to be such an Oilers homer, but at the same time, you're sitting there going, Draisaitl, let's be real. Leon Draisaitl has to be in there. He has to be in there.
I agree. Yeah, if I were making a list of 3 extras, Draisaitl would be number 1 on my list. So
It has to be. I mean, we mentioned his point total already as well. My third player for the All-Star game would probably end up being, ooh, it's a tough one. You know what? I like the Vegas Golden Knights. Here's a little bit of an underlie. No, not Jack Eichel. Chandler Stevenson. I've really liked Chandler Stevenson's game so far. I think they're going to end up probably adding a forward, a defenseman, and a goalie anyways. But I do think that Chandler Stevenson has been one of the most underrated players in the Pacific Division specifically, but in the NHL too, playing on one of the most underrated teams, of course, as well, in the Vegas Golden Knights, who don't get enough talked about them too. So, why not? Let's throw in a little fun and throw in Chandler Stevenson.
yeah, I like that pick. I think he's a great player, an underrated player on that team, and that's just kind of what Vegas is this year. A lot of underrated players, not necessarily one star of the show, although it's easy to point out Jack Eichel is a superstar on that team, and Logan Thompson, I think, has had a phenomenal season and is very much deserving of the All-Star nod that he got. In the Pacific Division, goaltending from team to team can be a little bit hard to come by, but he's been about as solid as they come. So I like those picks, and for the Central Division, it's a little bit difficult. I think I'm going to let your Oilers bias show a little bit. I'll let mine show for the list of players. I think Rope Hintz for the Dallas Stars should certainly be in the All-Star game this season. He's been fantastic. 19 goals, 25 assists, 44 points in total. He's currently injured at the moment with an upper body injury that he sustained on Sunday. According to Coach Pete DeBoer, it's nothing long term, but it doesn't look like he's going to play for the Stars on this road trip that they're on in New York. But regardless of that, he's been nothing short of spectacular for this season. He plays both sides of the ice. He can skate well, and I think he would deserve a nod. I think Mikko Rantanen from Colorado, we talked about the Avalanche earlier in the show and the injuries they've sustained, and he's a big part of why they've stayed competitive and what has kept them afloat. 26 goals, 22 assists, 48 points. I mean, he's phenomenal. I feel like if he was on, if he was the number 1 guy there and it wasn't Nathan McKinnon, I think he would get a lot more, discussion about him being one of the best forwards in the league. But I mean, he shares a team with a ton of other superstars. So I think he gets buried and deserves a little bit more credit. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him maybe get a third spot. And then I'll go goaltender for the third spot with Connor Hellebuck from Winnipeg. I know Josh Morrissey. Again, I think the NHL got that right. He's having a fantastic season. I don't think anybody saw this coming from Josh Norrisy or Morrissey, whatever you want to call him, because I think he's certainly leading that Norris race, maybe alongside Erik Karlsson. But Connor Hellebuck has been lights out for the Winnipeg Jets this season. And UC Saros deserves a ton of credit as well. A lot of good goaltending in the Central Division. Jake Ottinger, just to shout out another Dallas Star. Even the Minnesota Wild get some good goaltending every now and then. But Connor Hellebuck has been the class of the NHL this season, and has been in the Vezina conversation all season, rightfully so. He's been so good, and I think he definitely could deserve to get an All-Star nod this season.
I'm 100% behind all of those. I'm also going to change mine as well. I'm going to take out Nuge, which it hurts me a little bit, but I'm dumb. I'll put this right here, right now. I'm dumb. What about Bo Horvat?
Mm.
29 goals, 15 assists, 44 points, one of the league leaders in goals as well.
How did he not get the bid over Pedersen?
Right? That's literally what I'm thinking too. He's like 3 points behind Pedersen for points, and he has over 12 or he has 12 more goals than Bo Horvat or than Elias Pedersen. I don't understand that. Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat here. I think it should be Bo Horvat either way. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll keep my 3 and I'll swap out Pedersen with Bo Horvat. There we go.
Yeah.
And I just have one more burning question when it comes to the All-Star game, especially for someone in the Central Division. A lot of talk around Seth Jones kind of slipping in there. Obviously, each team needs representation, but would you have put Seth Jones in the All-Star game? And bearing in mind that every team needs a representative, would you have put somebody else there?
Yeah, I think Seth Jones is probably the right pick there. I mean, Chicago, we all know they're at the bottom of the league standings, worst record in the league, I believe, worst point or the lowest amount of points, at least in the West. So, I mean, it's hard to make a pick there and say that anyone is having a fantastic season, but I think that Seth Jones is probably a pretty good pick. I mean, it's slim pickings there. Your other options are maybe Max Domi, 12 goals on the season. Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane haven't been fantastic this season. They've just been okay. So, Seth Jones, I think, still has a good amount of his career left ahead of him, and he's been a bright spot. I mean, the one game that they played against the Stars, he did really well, and I think that he's a bright spot on a team that otherwise doesn't have a lot of brightness around it. So I'm happy for him. I don't know if this is his first All-Star appearance. I had it pulled up a second ago, but I mean, it's a rough year for the Chicago Blackhawks and their fan base. So hopefully they get to see Seth Jones, play well in the All-Star game, or at least participate in some noteworthy events, and they can maybe get a little bit out of it.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I think if it was to be one other player, my player would probably be Max Domi as well. Either way, it is his 5th time in his career is Seth Jones. A lot, surprisingly, but he had a lot of very good seasons in Columbus as well. But let's wrap up today's episode here, Dane. Another fantastic Tuesday. A lot coming up this week, a lot coming up for the second half of the season. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, as always, people can find me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis. And if you ever want more insight on the Dallas Stars, just search Locked On Stars on Instagram and Twitter and on your favorite podcasting platform and YouTube. Actually, just did a crossover episode with Gil Martin. I know people that listen to the national show know who Gil is very well, host of Locked On Islanders. The Stars playing the Islanders tonight. So if you want a preview of that game and some good conversation about the Stars and Isles, be sure to give that a listen on both the Stars feed and the Islanders feed.
I love it. And for me, you can find me personally at The Real Holden 40. That's on everything YouTube, or not on YouTube, on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. I think my TikTok's that too. So if you really want to get into some TikTok dances, make sure you check me out there. No, but you don't care about me. You care about the team and Locked On Oilers. And you can find us on Twitter at Locked On Oilers, exactly how it sounds. Or if you haven't found us on YouTube yet and subscribed, what are you doing? You get obscure Jack Campbell jerseys.
Oh,
okay? At the Texas Stars. I may have already flaunted that once, but I don't care. Either way, you can find us at Locked On Oilers on YouTube as well. Toss a subscription if you feel like it. Either way, thank you so much for joining us on Western Conference Tuesdays here at Locked On NHL. Stay safe. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.